Still single? Relax. Your boyfriend is not even born yet. Hi, I'm Carole Podell, and this is She Takes the Lead. Hi, party people. It's Carole. How are you today? It's beautiful where I am. I hope the same for you. Today, I want to talk about the age gap in dating and what works, what doesn't work. Full disclosure, the last two celebrity crushes that I have had, one was 23 and one was 31. I am solidly 2 to 3 decades older than these men, and it threw me and kind of continues to, but I'm like following them and doing rabbit hole searches and stuff like that. And I kind of wanted to, for myself and for just all the women and men out there who are looking down the barrel of this kind of thing, I wanted to do a little research on it because it was so weird. Typically in my own experience, I've dated men that are my age, including my ex-husband, who was within about 6 months, although looked and seemed older. And then I've dated older men. And for a while, I really was very into like the salt and pepper look and like the maturity and everything else. And that was for a while. So all of a sudden, now I'm like, these little young newbies are around and I'm like, this is interesting. Same thing. I'm walking along the street and I'm like, okay, there's that I could probably be that boy's mom. And also, please don't judge me. Is just a little bit of a lofty conversation, but I kind of want to call out because it's not as uncommon, right, for men to date younger women. So like, let's say what's younger? Is 10 years a big gap? Is 20 years a big gap? Is 30 years a big gap? I mean, yes, the 30 years is definitely a big gap, right? But who's to say it doesn't work? You see a lot of times, at least I have seen, a second wife is significantly younger than her husband. If an older guy is dating a younger woman, it's like, hey, go for it, cool. Now, if an older woman is dating a younger guy, her friends are definitely like, yeah, go for it, cool. But there's also those friends that are like, seriously, that boy could be my child. What prompted this? There's a couple of things that prompted this. It just kept coming up, so I just was like, I have to go down this road with you guys. I don't know if you guys have seen there's a meme out there and it says, "Dear girls, Madonna was 57 when her boyfriend was 24. Tina Turner was 77 when her boyfriend was 42. J-Lo was 44 when her boyfriend was 28. Still single? Relax. Your boyfriend is not even born yet." And I love that. I think it's so funny. And periodically I send it to my friends, et cetera, et cetera. So somebody sent me that recently as I was talking in my personal life just about, I think it started when I was like, there was a young man, and admittedly the picture was very mature, facial hair, just sexy and hot. And when I looked, I was like, okay, that's a 23-year-old man. That's very young. And it made me feel a little ick, like full on little ick, maybe a little more than little. But I was still kind of turned my sparkles on a little bit. So it was kind of an interesting perspective. I've dated one man who was younger than me, and it was fabulous. He was amazing, and we got along really well, but he wasn't like significantly, I mean, like, I don't know, 10 or 11 years, which to me doesn't feel that difference at this point in life. When I was 30, dating a 20-year-old would be insane because they're children in my mind, or at least in my mind now, that seems very, very big, especially because women kind of mature a little faster than men do earlier on. And then there's obviously the whole kid thing, right? Like women have a biological clock, regardless of whether you think it's so, and science can come in. And I had my kiddo at 46. So there's a lot that can happen. But I spent 4 years and a lot of money and a lot of heartache and a lot of time trying to have her. So the window for having babies without any issues, I mean, or at least ideally without any issues, is really until you're like 35. And then it's technically, it's a geriatric pregnancy. I mean, there are plenty of women that have babies between 35 and 45, but the truth is that it gets harder. And statistically, quote unquote, the numbers decrease tremendously. So by, I think, 43, there's like a 2% or a 3% chance that you can get pregnant naturally. I think at 41, it's 11%, I believe. I've done a lot of footwork on that. So I understand from that perspective, women are trying to have babies. 20-year-old men are not necessarily wanting to have babies. And 30-year-old women, they're in a different time of life. And I think that for me is what's shifting, because I really think at a point, it's really your time of life and what you're doing in your life at that moment that really brings into play the age gap as significant or insignificant. So when I was dating and hoping to meet someone who would be the father of my children, oftentimes I would meet men that were a solid 10 years older than me who had, children that were in their teens or early 20s that did not want any more children. I mean, that was, to be honest, that was my issue, quote unquote, for a little while there, was I kept meeting these men who were older, not significantly older, let's say 10 years, which when you're 35, 45 is not significantly older. When you're 45, 55 does not feel significantly older. But in terms of time of life, depending on when someone starts their family, if they've had a family prior to that age relationship, they've gone through the sleepless nights and the baby bottles and the, walking stage where you have to baby proof the house all of a sudden, and all of these pieces of life that are hard, that are hard, not just mentally hard or hard on a relationship, but ultimately hard on the body. There is something to be said for being younger and having children. Now, I love being my age and having my kid when I had her, because I am completely focused on her. Like if I were 30 when I had my kid, there would have been 1,000 other things I would have been thinking I was missing out on, because I was not doing that, but raising my kid. And I know that's not uncommon. I've had conversations with many friends where that happened. And that's normal, frankly. That's normal now. I mean, it's not like I'm totally 100% all the time focused on only her, but because I do have other things that I'm thinking about and want to do and want to achieve, and I'm not dead yet. But there really is a difference, I have cocktail party stories. I've lived a life thus far. I have some interesting things. And maybe that's what's also kicking off the idea that it doesn't really matter the age now, because I don't have an agenda of what I need from them. Money is not really an issue. I mean, money is always an issue, but money is not really an issue. In terms of I have a career, I have my life, I support my family, etc. Children is no longer an issue because I have mine. So I don't really need to worry about that. So then it becomes time of life. So if I were my age and thinking about retiring soon, and there's some of my friends, God bless them, because they've made enough to be able to do this. I will be retiring when I'm dead. They are talking about retiring, and they're the same age, and they've worked, 30, 35 years at this point, professionally. And they're thinking about retiring. That's so not on my agenda. So it makes sense that I'm not looking for somebody in that age range. So there was a Ipsos poll, and statistically, these are things I kind of find interesting. In the US, 18% of marriages have an age gap of at least 2 years. Okay. And then it gets further down the road, right? 33% of couples in the US with a significant age difference are more likely to get divorced. Now, what's a significant age difference? Is that 10? Is that 20? So there's another poll. This was taken in 2017. Couples with a 4-year difference have a 20% less divorce rate. So that's an interesting one. There's a 20% less divorce rate with a 4-year age gap. There are only in the US, this is the 2024 poll, 8.5% of married women have a spouse who is 10 years younger than them. That's not a lot. 8.5%, that's a solid 10 years. Then for married women who have a spouse that's 10 years younger or more, it drops down to 6%. And the average age difference in a heterosexual couple is 2.3 years. I find this so interesting. This is first marriages. I see the age differences in second marriages more than first marriages. That's just my own experience. That's not any poll I've seen. Okay, so here's the separation divorce rate. If the age difference in a marriage is more than 9 years, the couple is 8 times more likely to separate. So if there's a 9-year gap, they're 8x more likely to separate. That's crazy. Why? Why? Because they're not in the same time of life, because they don't have the same references, like musical references, maybe, because you learn more as you get older. So often there's a dynamic. There's like the alpha and then the not, or the beta, if you want to call them that, the one who kind of is more mature and leading the relationship, et cetera, et cetera. And that's more often with men than with women. The other thing is, if you reverse it, this is a different poll going back, it's an Ipsos poll going back to 2017, but men are 25% more likely to have dated someone 10 plus years younger than them, compared to 14% of women are more likely to have dated someone 10 plus years younger than them. Meanwhile, 28% of women are more likely to have dated someone 10 plus years older than them, compared to 21% of men who are more likely to have dated someone 10 plus years older than them. And this is just dated, right? This isn't married. This isn't having a life together. This is just dated. Statistically, unmarried Americans who are 35 years or older are more open than those who are 35 years or less to dating someone who's 10 plus years younger than them. So Americans over the age of 35 are more likely to date people who are younger than them by 10 years, so 35 and younger, and believe that that is socially acceptable for a man to date someone 10 years younger than them. This is for men. And there is something to that. Like if you're 35 and you're dating a 25-year-old, that's a pretty big gap in life, right? Whether you're a man or a woman. But, you know, women at 25 are starting to think about getting married, or they want to have kids, et cetera, et cetera. And a man who's 35, again, men don't mature as fast as women do when they're that age. You know, it just is. I mean, you can see it with kids that are 5 even now. So if you're a 35-year-old woman and a 25-year-old man, you know, the jump is not insignificant. Some could argue it's also hot, but okay, so now you keep going. At 45 years old, she's 45 and he's 35. That's fine. You've had your babies, let's say, or maybe you don't want children, but you're living your life. That's not as big of a jump. 55 to 45. I mean, women are really going through perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause and menopause, you know, between 30 and 50, I think at this point, 35, between 35 and let's say 50-ish, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger on both sides. So your body is changing tremendously. Your hormones are changing tremendously. Your sex drive is changing tremendously. So one could argue that your sex drive is different and a man's sex drive continues forward, I think, until they're 40, when it drops a little bit. So, you know, one could argue that's a change of life, but at the same time, if you've been together for a long time, you know, you've probably been similarly on the same page sexually, and hopefully, and you can kind of land there and meet. Okay, so 50 to 60, a woman's 60, a man's 50, a woman's 70, a man's 60, a woman's 80, a man's 70, 90, 80, on and on and on, right? Women live longer than men. So why are we dating older men? I don't understand it. It's obviously a societal norm, or it's more normal and potentially that's because, you know, men are older, they've made more money, they can be the hunter-gatherers more successfully, and the younger women are still more supple, they're still more fertile, they're still more quote unquote desirable that way innately, I guess. But it's really like, it's not practical. It's just not practical once you hit 40 to date somebody who's older than you. I have an amazing friends who are family, aunt and uncle. I don't know how old they are, but I believe there's a 25-year age difference, and they've been together for more than 50 years. So whatever math you feel like doing, welcome to it. I'm not saying anything about age. However, they're one of the happiest couples I've ever seen. They don't have kids. They didn't want kids. They've had very interesting lives, both of them. He adores her. She thinks he's magnificent. I would agree with both of them, frankly. And they have lived this wonderful life together for a long time with this huge age gap. I do remember when I was younger, there was a vibe between the two of them, you know? I mean, I didn't really understand what was going on, but there was definitely, and frankly, there still is a vibe. They connected on a level that just is what it is. And they have been together for a really long time. For me to even be going down this rabbit hole and admitting that I was getting hot for a 23-year-old and a 31-year-old is probably, or at least more in my universe, a little bit, scandalous. Ha ha ha. The other reason I'm bringing this up, by the way, is because when you live in the extremes aren't really a big deal. So if you're sort of a person who is very comfortable outside of quote unquote societal norms, right? So you've kind of done what's expected of you, or like what's quote unquote normal or typical. So you finish your education, you get out of school, you get your first job, you try to work your way up that ladder, you go out, you hang out, you get drunk, you make mistakes. Then over time, maybe you meet somebody that you want to be with for a while and connect with, and then you get married, and then you have babies, and then you move up in the ladder, and then you raise those babies, and then you keep moving forward, and then the babies go to college, and then it's like a redo of another relationship. And that can be very much like on point. Like, these are the things that you do. These are the things that we've been told we're supposed to do over time. Now, I am not one that lives outside of societal norms, although I have been told by my aunt that I do march to the beat of my own drums. And clearly I do to a certain degree, but I never thought of myself as somebody who did that. And I certainly would never be described as someone that's like, oh yeah, Carole, she's absolutely lives outside of societal norms. I do have my own thoughts and my own perspectives on things, and I try to abide by them. But like, probably the biggest one that I've done is having a baby out by myself. So what I guess I'm addressing is the people who are not outside of societal norms, who then make a decision, or life happens in a way that is not what you're expecting, or a person in your life happens in a way that's not what you're expecting, is a little jarring. And you can get used to thinking things are okay or not okay. So I did everything backwards, right? I got into a serious relationship in my 20s. I got divorced in my 30s. I dated half a Manhattan in my other part of my 30s into my 40s. I started trying to have a baby in my 40s, and finally had a baby by myself in my mid 40s. That's definitely not what, the quote unquote plan is. And that wasn't even my plan. That's just what happened. That's sort of what happened. And I'm stubborn, and I wasn't willing to sacrifice certain things. So I did it that way, career-wise as well, I think. I mean, I started my career very focused and very specific. I'd always been in the arts. I'd always been a singer. I'd always been in theater. I'd always been in some way in production, and really just went full force. And then at some point was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't what I want to do. It's not serving my life the way it used to, and deigned to make a change, which I did. And I mean, ironically, then you go into something linear and corporate. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to do that, because it has supported my life and I do enjoy it. So I feel happy that I've been able to do it. But it's not the order that most people do it, I think. And I guess that's what I'm trying to challenge right now, is that if you are a person who is typically in like the norm, what is typical, what is statistically proper, and something happens that is not what you're expecting, do you move into it? Do you just acknowledge it and move on and stay within your box? What do you do? I'd be curious to hear some stories from you guys, frankly, because I'm sure you guys have plenty of stories of that moment, right? That moment when you're like, I can either keep going straight or I can make that left turn. And the left turn may bring me to a place that's not comfortable, that's not where I thought I would be. It's not where I intended to be. And it may get me off a path that feels really safe, but also I will likely miss out on an experience. Now, the experience itself may be horrible, but it's an experience. And isn't that why we're on the earth in the first place? Is to have these experiences. I think that that is important, even if it ends poorly or it doesn't end up in a fairy tale fantasy of whatever that is, depending on the subject, whether that is you end up with a baby or you end up successfully being a single mom and raising your child, or you end up being 80 with a 40-year-old spouse, or you end up having a career that you didn't want or not needing a career anymore. Maybe you were super, super focused when you were younger on a career, and suddenly you're like, you know what? I just need a job. I'm going to just have a job because I have other things in my life that are important to me that I want to be able to do. And this job that is not as important to me, although I take it seriously enough to get paid to do it, leads me to a life that I want. These are all things that I certainly did not grow up thinking they were what you do. And my parents were pretty, I don't want to say revolutionary, but they certainly didn't live inside all the boxes themselves. I mean, they both came to New York when it was not the time to come to New York. Like, New York was not like the lovely place to be. It was, and they both had big dreams, and they both kind of left their family dogma to a degree to come and live a different life than the one that they had grown up with. And, my mother, when I was a kid, apparently, this was the 70s, my mom wore pants, which at the time, I guess, was not something women wore that much. And I would apparently tell her, Mom, why can't you just come in a skirt? I so apologize, Mom. I understand entirely why you wanted to wear pants. And in my opinion, age should not stop you from anything, whether that's finding your person, to changing your career, to learning a sport, to deciding you want to try a new hobby, to making a full about face and changing your mind and doing something else with whatever part of your life you feel like doing. I don't think there's an age limit to it. In fact, if you talk to very successful people, they will say the same thing in terms of your careers. They will say exactly the same thing. I don't know, like Julia Child wrote her first cookbook at 50. Vera Wang started her collection at 40. There's a lot of people that do really great things once they've lived their lives. Even outside of we're having a fun laugh about age ranges in dating, I think it really bleeds into everything else that you do. Age is just a number. You can connect with people on so many different levels, friends as well. If you want to, you can always continue learning and growing. That is not and cannot and should not be only for the young. The next piece of the age gap, I'm going back to the age gap part, is same friends that are family aunt. I was out with them. We were shopping, and I love shopping with them. It's always an amazing thing. I get fantastic stuff. They see looks and styles that I'd never see, and I always feel great. It's also just fun. We were walking around, and this was maybe 10 years ago. She said to me, such and such just graduated from college. Look, and showed me this picture of this very handsome young man. I'd heard a lot about this boy growing up, and he seemed like a great boy and they love him, so I was happy and excited to see the picture. And then she goes, he would be cute for you. And my jaw dropped entirely to the floor, and I was like, oh my God, he's a child, which he was. I mean, he just graduated from college, not high school, but college. And her response was amazing. She was like, you don't want to have to push someone around in a wheelchair when they're old and you're still young. It was an amazing response because she's right. I'm not saying I'm going out and dating a 23-year-old. That's not what I'm saying. Although, who the hell knows? There's 2 movies out right now that are about older women with younger men. And one could also argue that, part of the reason is that one of them is Anne Hathaway, who's, I think, plays a 40-year-old, and she looks like she's 25. And I think dates a 25-year-old or a 23-year-old or something like that at 40 in the movie. And then Nicole Kidman, same thing. Now, these women, forgive me, because this is also just reality of life as a woman in the United States, certainly, is that these women do not look 50 or 40 used to look like, or the look that you have in your mind of what that looks like. Now, 50, 40, 60 even does not look like what it looks like in our minds anymore, because the golden girls were in their 50s and their late 40s, and they were the golden girls. This was like women in a like who were retirement age living together so they could have like a life. So it's the imagery that is conjured in your mind of what's messing with this on a certain level. Also, I mentioned perimenopause, menopause. Women take hormones. There's hormone replacement therapy, thank God, which keeps us more sexually comfortable. There's a whole bunch of things that start happening as you age, inevitably. I mean, same things happen with men, just in different ways, but for women, it's just there's a lot of other things that kind of come into play. Sex changes. I mean, also, frankly, sex changes for the better in a lot of ways, because you're more comfortable with yourself. You're more comfortable with what you're doing. You've had some experience, and you're more comfortable with other people, I think, and probably trying other things and not caring. Again, it's the not caring factor. Like, I don't care. I care. I care what people think. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But there's a lot of things that I just don't care about. I just want to be happy. I want my kid to be happy. I want to live a life that we love and that we're proud of, and that we can bring joy to our family and our friends. I really don't give a shit about what seems trivial to me, like somebody's age. If there's a connection, there's a connection. If there's not a connection, there's not a connection. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't. I mean, to me. But at 40, I remember at 40, and I was not telling anybody I was 40. I was appalled that somebody 50 wanted to date me. Not in a nasty way, but just in a like, that seems too old to me. At 35, admittedly, at 35, I wasn't really telling anybody my age, and I did look at least 30, so that made a difference. But like, dating somebody 45 seemed old. Certainly 50 seemed old, but it wasn't. I mean, I dated men at 35 who were 45, and it was lovely. Yeah, and the truth is that I have met plenty of men who are in their 30s who I adore. I don't mean like to date. I mean, like some of my friends, especially now that I have kids, they're in their late 30s, early 40s, whatever. Some are in their mid 30s, I think, and they're lovely and interesting, and they've lived a life. So it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And I guess I want to put a marker out there for all the women that are like living lives with all of these outside, like, what are they going to think of me? Or like, I'm going to be embarrassing or embarrassed. Let it go. It's not serving you. There's no societal requirement at this point that serves me more than my own gut instinct. The women who actually are in my vintage, like Nicole Kidman and Anne Hathaway, are, they're looking for projects where they can feel like they feel. Otherwise, the projects that are being written for them are for older women, like old women, quote unquote, air quotes, old women, meaning they're not talking about the stuff that we still talk about. Me and my girlfriends talk about guys all the time. We send pictures of them. I mean, we also talk about crazy parenting shit, and we also talk about menopause, and we also talk about like just life, and send each other crazy memes. But one of those topics is like hotness of man. So the Anne Hathaway, Nicole Kidman, there's a bajillion other movies or real life situations where there's an older woman with a younger man. Priyanka Chopra, I think, is married to Nick Jonas, and there's a 10-year split. Demi Moore was with Ashton Kutcher. There's a 15-year split there. And these are heterosexual relationships too. So like I had a friend who was a lesbian, and she was a little younger than me, but we were in I think I was in my 30s and she was in her 20s, and she just started dating a woman who was like 50. And I don't know if I made an askance face or not, but she said, yeah, there's a big age difference. She said, but in my community, that's not as big of a deal as in yours, meaning in my LGBTQ plus community, that's not as big of a deal as in your heterosexual community, where there's a larger age gap in relationships. I don't know if that's true. That's just what she said. Although if you look at it, like Ellen DeGeneres is married to Portia de Rossi, and there's like a 15-year split. And then there's Sarah Paulson, who's with Holland Taylor. And that's a major split. That's a 32-year split. Who cares? Like, they seem happy. I think Matt Bomer is with a man who's 14 years older than him, I think. Sorry, I'm just mentioning hot people right now. It's just where I'm going with it. But there's also normal people, or, like the non-celebrity superstars that are same thing, same idea. It wasn't like a Mrs. Robinson scenario. I mean, that's also the funny thing. And I guess that's the antiquatedness of this whole stupid requirement, is that part of the movie, The Graduate, it's with Dustin Hoffman and Anne Bancroft, and Anne Bancroft plays his girlfriend's mom, his fiance's mom, who's trying to seduce him. The piece that is so scandalous is that obviously she's trying to seduce her daughter's fiance, which is awful, but it's also that she's older and she deigns to be a sexy older woman. So I am going to deign to be my sexy older self. Ladies, if you're 50 and you're thinking about dating a 23-year-old, I say go for it. Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you like what you heard, please hit subscribe. Also, if you want to keep in touch, go to Insta at About a Blonde or Facebook at About a Blonde Official. Also, you can sign up for my mailing list at www.aboutablonde.com. Have a great day. Mwah!